My name is Sam Kean. I am the author of several books, including The Bastard Brigade, the true story of the renegade scientists and spies who sabotaged the Nazi atomic bomb.
How the Allies sabotaged the Nazi atomic bomb.
So imagine it's World War II, and you are a scientist who's been kicked out of Nazi Germany, and you've come to the United States. And you start to hear some rumors about some work going on in Germany about atomic bombs. And you are terrified because you know a few things about Germany. You know they have some of the best scientists in the world. You know they have a head start on important processes like fission that would help them make an atomic bomb. And you know they have the best industry in the world there. And most scary of all, Adolf Hitler is head of Germany at the time. He has shown himself to be ruthless in every other circumstance. And you think if he gets an atomic bomb in his hands, he is going to destroy the world. One thing that amplified a lot of scientists' fears was that they knew the Germans had also developed what they called their V weapons. Essentially, they were missiles. They could launch something in Germany, it could fly over to another country and explode there. And nowadays, we sort of take it for granted that missiles can fly hundreds or even thousands of miles. But to people back then, this was a terrifying thought, that even if they had Germany surrounded, they could still launch weapons over the top and wipe out whole cities, especially if they got atomic bombs mounted on the tops of those rockets. Werner Heisenberg, an atomic scientist living in Germany, one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century, a Nobel Prize winner, a brilliant, brilliant person. But he was working under the Nazi regime during World War II. And he was specifically working to help build an atomic bomb. One early experiment that he was doing was trying to create a chain reaction. Essentially, in a chain reaction, you have uranium atoms that split, they shoot neutrons off, these neutrons fly, they hit another uranium atom, that one splits, shoots more neutrons off. At each step, it releases energy, and with each step as it progresses, more and more energy gets released. So it's a chain reaction of events. Before this time, no one had ever been able to successfully produce a chain reaction in the lab, and Werner Heisenberg wanted to be the first one to do it. So he and his assistants built this giant sphere that had alternating layers of uranium and heavy water inside them. They put a neutron source in the very middle of this sphere and let it go and just started letting the chain reaction proceed to see what would happen. Unfortunately, partway through this experiment, they realized that there was a leak. There was water leaking in to the uranium. And uranium does not react well with water. It's actually explosive when the two come into contact. This is not an atomic explosion, it's a regular chemical explosion. But it is a doozy. And so once they noticed water started leaking into there, they essentially panicked, fled the room, and a minute later, boom, there was a giant explosion as all this uranium and heavy water burst into flames. There were 20-foot flames roaring out of the top of the building. They had to call the fire department in to put it out, and this fire burned for 2 days. That's how hot and intense this fire was. Now again, this was just a regular chemical explosion, but Heisenberg was working on an atomic project. And as Heisenberg started to tell his colleagues about this failed experiment, essentially a game of telephone occurred, where one person got the details, told another person, changed the details a little bit, maybe even inadvertently. But as the story kept getting passed along from person to person, it changed a little bit. It wasn't just a chemical explosion anymore, it was a low-grade atomic chain reaction. And then things got even wilder. Switzerland was a neutral country during the war, so scientists from Germany could travel there, but scientists from allied countries like the US or England could travel there as well. And they would often meet in Switzerland and talk and exchange stories. And this story about Werner Heisenberg's supposedly atomic fire got passed to allied scientists in Switzerland. They knew Germany was already working on an atomic bomb. And once they heard about this story, about this supposed atomic explosion that occurred, they panicked. They ran right back to their countries, told everyone about it, and before long, in their minds, this was a small-scale atomic explosion with several people dead, rumors were running wild about how close Germany was. In fact, one scientist at the University of Chicago, after hearing this story, did a few calculations on the blackboard, and he announced very gravely to his colleagues that Germany would have a bomb within 6 months. And it terrified them. And this is really where the Manhattan Project got going in earnest, was once they realized that Germany might be a lot farther along than they feared. So various scientists started talking, and they said, we have to take some action on this. We can't just be passive and let Germany potentially build an atomic bomb and not have a response for it. We need to start our own project to build an atomic bomb. But in addition to that, we need to start our own project to stop the Nazi atomic bomb project. And that is how the Alsace mission got put together. The essential goals of the mission were to spy on, sabotage, and in some cases even try to assassinate members of the Nazi atomic bomb project. There was a real motley crew of characters involved in this mission to stop the Nazi atomic bomb project. On the one hand, you had sort of the core Alsace mission. That was made up of military people and scientists. The military people came from the security branches of the Manhattan Project. The scientists usually came from the world of atomic science and atomic physics. And you just sort of threw them together and let them work. Kind of two different worlds coming together here. And there were often a lot of clashes about things like priorities, how to handle things. The scientists were a little more informal. The military people thought the scientists were a little too lackadaisical. A real culture clash within this unit, but they had to figure out how to work together for this very important project. Despite its importance, the people involved really did not get a lot of training. These were scientists coming right out of the lab. They weren't used to being under fire, running behind enemy lines, things like that. And the military people involved had no special knowledge of the science. They were just kind of winging it. But they didn't have a lot of other resources or precedent for what they were doing. So they just threw them out there and said, good luck, boys, let's see what happens. In addition to that, you had sort of these peripheral side branches of this project. One involved what was called the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. But the OSS was not the sort of professional, well-run organization that the CIA became in later times. The OSS was pretty freewheeling and, in fact, sort of chaotic in a lot of cases. They recruited a Major League Baseball player named Moe Berg to be an atomic spy to go into Europe, slip in there undercover, and try to ferret out whatever he could about the Nazi atomic bomb project. Now, it sounds kind of strange on the face of it that you would recruit a Major League Baseball player as the first atomic spy in history. But Berg was not your typical average Major League Baseball player. He could speak 5 or 6 languages fluently. He was friends with Albert Einstein. He was the perfect person for this role. And in addition to that, you had another military branch that was essentially developing weapons that could potentially wipe out any atomic bunkers that the Nazis did build. Different branches of the mission were working on different goals at the same time. You had the core Alsace unit in Europe who were trying to push toward the front lines and gather up any material or people that they could find. One early success of theirs was they were one of the first military units to actually get into Paris during its liberation. Even when the Nazis were still gunning people down in the streets trying to defend Paris, the lead avant-garde of the Alsace mission was running in there trying to get to a few atomic scientists there. Most importantly was Frederick Joliot, who was the husband of Irene Joliot-Curie, the daughter of Marie Curie, a very famous and prominent scientist who had in fact pioneered a lot of the atomic research and the chain reaction research that underlay the atomic bomb. Then you had another mission in Norway that was going after one of the key ingredients in the Nazi atomic bomb, a substance called heavy water. So compared to regular water, heavy water is obviously a bit heavier. There's essentially an extra subatomic particle on the hydrogen in H2O. And that has a lot of nice properties when you're trying to build and test atomic equipment and get chain reactions going. The Nazis were very dependent on heavy water from a plant in Norway. In fact, that was the only place in the world that was producing heavy water at the time. And so the people in charge of the Alsace mission decided, we cannot let this plant survive. So they snuck a few commandos undercover into Norway who spent several days trekking through the snow and ice. They infiltrated this plant and they destroyed all of the heavy water cells in there. It's one of the big first success stories of the Alsace mission, and it really delayed and damaged the Nazi atomic bomb project. So that was one of the very big successes that they had. In many ways, Alsace was an unconventional mission with unconventional people on the front line, but there were conventional military aspects to the overall project as well. One important event here was the bombing of Peenemünde, which is where the Nazis were building all of the rockets that they were launching into England and other places. The Allies feared that here the Nazis were going to build the rockets they would use to deliver atomic weapons. So they decided to wipe it out and prevent any prospect of that happening. One important aspect of the Alsace mission was espionage, gathering information about what the German scientists were up to and where they were getting material and storing their material. After hunting down some leads and interrogating some scientists, they finally managed to track down a warehouse with several tons of raw uranium ore in it. They seized it immediately, not only to get it out of Nazi hands, but to get it over to the United States for our Manhattan Project. And most of that uranium ended up in the bomb that got dropped in Hiroshima the next year. In terms of the core espionage mission, they were on the front lines. They were often, in fact, beyond the front lines in enemy territory while there was shooting going on both sides. One group, led by Boris Pash, were some of the first people in Paris during its liberation. They were under fire the entire time they were doing that. The ex-Major League Baseball player Mo Berg went undercover and snuck into Switzerland posing as a graduate student. While he was there, he attended a lecture by none other than Werner Heisenberg, and Berg entered the lecture room that day with a pistol in one pocket and a cyanide pill in the other. And his mission was, if Heisenberg said anything about them being close to making an atomic bomb, Berg was supposed to stand up and shoot Heisenberg dead right there in the middle of the lecture. Then he was supposed to try to get away, but if he didn't, he had that cyanide pill to take to kill himself right there. He was under a lot of danger and a lot of pressure and easily could have died undertaking this mission. And then you had people who were trying to wipe out the Nazi atomic bunkers. This included Joseph Kennedy, the older brother of John F. Kennedy, the future president. Essentially, they were trying to fly what were drone airplanes. So they would have a big bomber airplane that they were going to pack with explosives, fly it across the English Channel, and ram it into a Nazi atomic bunker, which would have been a pretty good idea, a pretty big conventional bomb. But the problem was these drone airplanes could not take off on their own. They could fly on their own, but not take off. So they needed pilots to volunteer to get in these planes packed with explosives, get them off the runway, point them toward their target, and then eject out of these flying bombs. And Joseph Kennedy volunteered to be one of these people. A very brave mission, and he ended up losing his life because of it. The death of John F. Kennedy's older brother, Joe, really changed the dynamics of the Kennedy family. He was Joseph Kennedy Jr., the firstborn son. And he had been the one that their father had always groomed for the presidency. And their father actually said at one point that John would not amount to a whole lot. Joe was going to be the big star. But with Joe dead, they had to put all of their time and energy and passion into John instead, and he became the president. The goal of the Alsace mission was to stop the Nazi atomic bomb project however they could. And some historians think there were also people on the inside in Germany who were trying to do those same things. In particular, Werner Heisenberg always claimed later that he deliberately slowed the Nazi atomic bomb project down so that they would not make progress. Not outright sabotage, but not working as hard as they could. It's a very controversial claim, and a lot of people don't believe Heisenberg. They think he was just doing that to make himself look good after the war. But it is an open question about how much the Germans were trying to build a bomb and how much they were dragging their feet, knowing that Adolf Hitler would ruin the world if he got his hands on one. So they had to decide how much they wanted to weigh those two things, saving Germany versus empowering one of the worst dictators of all time. There were also ethical dilemmas for scientists on the other side working in the Manhattan Project. A lot of them got started with the project because they had been run out of Nazi Germany and they hated Adolf Hitler. They were happy to build a bomb to take Hitler out. But once Germany lost the war, they suddenly realized that, now we're still fighting Japan. We don't want to necessarily use this bomb on Japan. But by that point, the tests had gone so far and there was a momentum to the project that they would not be able to stop. So a lot of them felt very conflicted about the idea of using it on Japan when they had originally built it to go after Adolf Hitler. Some scientists at the time said they didn't want to use the atomic bomb on Japan. They wanted to give Japan a demonstration, show them how deadly it was before we actually used it on innocent people. But the military said no about that. They wanted to use it in war. And a lot of scientists, most famously Robert Oppenheimer, expressed regrets about this afterward.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
They wish they had pushed harder for a test or tried to stop it in some way, but that's not the way history turned out. The big success of the Alsos mission was in figuring out that Germany was not going to be able to build an atomic bomb by the war's end. What this result did was it allowed the Allied planners, people like Dwight Eisenhower and the other generals, to get their focus off of big surprises, atomic bombs, and they could focus on what they knew well, which was conventional warfare. Essentially, it was a big relief for them to not have to worry about this wild card, Germany suddenly coming up with something that would turn the tides of the war in their favor. So it was a big relief for them to know that we were going to win the war if we just kept doing what we were doing. Toward the end of the war, the Alsos mission captured most of the key players in the Nazi atomic bomb project and brought them to England, where they put them up at a big country estate and just put them under house arrest, essentially. And when news broke of the atomic bomb that had dropped in Hiroshima, they were absolutely stunned to hear that the United States had built an atomic bomb when mighty Germany had failed at the project. They could not believe that anyone had beaten them, the greatest scientists in the world. After Nazi Germany fell, there was sort of a scramble to grab all of the greatest scientists that they could. And this happened on both sides of what would become the Iron Curtain. The Allies were scooping up scientists like Wernher von Braun, who went on to NASA to become one of the most famous scientists and one of the most famous people in the United States. But the Soviet Union was sweeping up scientists too. This was an early skirmish, actually, in the Cold War, was grabbing these scientists and pitting them against each other in building things like missiles and other weapons. The Manhattan Project changed the world by ushering in the atomic age. And I don't think, actually, we would have atomic bombs nowadays if not for the fear that we had of Adolf Hitler getting an atomic bomb first. One of the best scientists of the 20th century, Niels Bohr, famously said that there was no way anyone could build an atomic bomb. And his reason wasn't that the science was too hard. He said you couldn't do it because you would have to turn your entire country into a factory to refine enough uranium or to get the plutonium for an atomic bomb. He just didn't think anyone would make that commitment. And probably no country would have, except the United States had scientists terrified about Adolf Hitler. The Manhattan Project was one of the biggest industrial projects in history. It cost $2 billion in 1945 money. It was a massive project. They would never have been able to justify the cost without that fear driving them. A few things about the Nazi ideology really interfered with their ability to carry out atomic research. One was the fact that they didn't like Jewish people, and they kicked a lot of very smart scientists out of Europe who ended up coming to the United States and playing key roles on our Manhattan Project. We certainly would not have built an atomic bomb without the influx of talent from Nazi Germany. And the other aspect was that a lot of Nazis were just sort of snobs. They figured they were the most advanced civilization in the world and that no other nation could possibly reach the same levels that they did, especially not a Yahoo country like the United States. There were many scientists in Germany who were stunned to hear that the United States, of all countries, had built an atomic bomb where they had failed to. They were so blinded by their own supposed superiority that they never considered another country would beat them. If the Nazi atomic bomb project had not failed, we would live in a much different world. And even if Hitler had never used the bombs per se, just the threat of it, the thought of him having the bombs, would have really changed everything about how we negotiated, what lands we were willing to give up. Hitler could have overrun Europe and completely dominated the continent, or he would have moved into Asia and Africa. He might have even gone over to North America or farther and tried to conquer that. With atomic bombs, he was basically omnipotent. He could do whatever he wanted.
Want to support the channel? Join the Big Think members community where you get access to videos early, ad-free.